US President-elect Donald Trump tapped trade lawyer Jamieson Greer as his new trade representative Tuesday. It comes a day after Trump's threats of hefty tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, as he urged them to step up efforts to curb the drug trade, especially regarding fentanyl and illegal immigration. Greer was a veteran of Trump's first-term trade war against China. Back then, he served as chief of staff to former Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. His views on China are also firmly aligned with Trump, saying there is a need to counter China's efforts to dominate global industries. Testifying before the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission in May, he argued in favor of increased tariffs and advocated for stronger export controls on sensitive U.S. technologies. Trump's rhetoric has prompted China to warn that no one can win a trade war. It has also drawn a rebuke from Mexico. Country President Claudia Sheinbaum said her government could retaliate with tariffs of its own, with severe economic consequences for both sides. Meanwhile, Mexican border towns are already feeling the strain from Trump's plans. Jesus Manuel Sayandia, coordinator of the Border Business Bloc, said border cities have been losing a lot of competitiveness, and many industries have been feeling uncertain about the future.
We
are going to see how things will progress once the president-elect takes office on January 20th. But the messages they have been sending, saying they want to raise tariffs, calling the border conflictive, talking of issues like violence and migration, they are not contributing to all of the investments that could come.
Others take a more nuanced view, suggesting Trump's threats may be more of a negotiating tactic. Mario Cepeda is president of the Mexican Employers Confederation in the border town of Ciudad Juarez. He says Trump is starting to negotiate better conditions for his country and looking after his own interests. Cepeda says Mexico should do the same.
U.S. stocks ended higher on Tuesday as tech stocks rebounded while investors digested President-elect Donald Trump's tariff pledges and the latest minutes from the Federal Reserve. The Dow added about 0.33%, while the S&P 500 and NASDAQ each added roughly 0.6%. In a development overnight, Trump said he would impose a 25% conditional tariff on Canadian and Mexican imports that could violate a free trade deal he negotiated during his previous term. That knocked shares of Ford and General Motors, with GM down 9%, as the automakers have highly integrated supply chains across those countries. Meanwhile, minutes of the Fed's policy meeting earlier this month showed officials appeared to be divided over how much further they may need to cut interest rates. Shana Orsic-Sissel, founder and CEO of Bonrian Capital Management, said she's positioning for what she called a possible Fed mistake.
I don't know if cutting rates further is the right move. I'm not sure inflation is under concern. There are risks through tariffs and other policy decisions that could increase inflation. And there's indications that the employment markets are not as stable as many think on the surface. These things could lead the Fed to cut rates when they really shouldn't, and thus potentially lead to some market volatility and lower returns than we've seen.
Notable stock gains on Tuesday included Microsoft and Apple, while well-known drug companies moved in opposite directions. Shares of Amgen dropped nearly 5% after its experimental obesity drug fell short of expectations, while Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, which also make popular weight loss drugs, rose after President Joe Biden proposed expanding Medicare and Medicaid coverage for anti-obesity medications.
Trading partners Mexico, Canada, and China are warning U.S. President-elect Donald Trump that his threat of imposing hefty tariffs on goods would harm the economies of all involved and would risk aggravating inflation. Trump made a surprise announcement on Monday for a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, as well as an additional 10% levy on Chinese goods until they clamped down on drugs like fentanyl and migrants crossing the border. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum on Tuesday said imposing tariffs would cause inflation and job losses, and suggested possible retaliation. In a letter to Trump, she said, quote, "To one tariff will come another and so on, until we put our common businesses at risk." The United States is by far the dominant destination for vehicles made in Mexico, with up to 79% of them heading north across the border, while Canada is America's biggest supplier of crude oil. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he had a good call with Trump on Monday night.
This is a relationship that we know takes a certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do. One of the really important things is that we be all pulling together on this. The Team Canada approach is what works.
Meanwhile, a spokesperson for China's embassy in Washington said, quote, "No one will win a trade war or a tariff war." Tariffs are paid by the companies that import goods, even though Trump frequently and incorrectly says that tariffs would hit foreign nations instead.
There is a negotiation going on.
But chief economist Stephen Prosciutto from Mizuho Securities USA, speaking to Reuters, says it would still cause a ripple effect, especially in Canada and Mexico.
Very, very clear that every country that has substantial manufacturing on each side of the border would be affected. But you also have to understand, given the weakness in global economic activity, it's hard for these suppliers to not absorb some of the cost.
Tariffs could violate the USMCA agreement, a trade deal Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. signed in 2020 during Trump's first administration.
Tout le monde. I had a good call with Donald Trump last night again. We obviously talked about laying out the facts, talking about how the intense and effective connections between our two countries flow back and forth. We talked about some of the challenges that we can work on together. It was a good call. This is something that we can do, laying out the facts, moving forward in constructive ways. This is a relationship that we know takes a certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do. One of the really important things is that we be all pulling together on this. The Team Canada approach is what works.